is Rebecca Johnson, and I love Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. And I am publishing a series of videos exploring the reasons why I am such a fan of Zack Snyder's film. In this series, you'll find my thoughts on topics that matter to me, like Larry Fong's cinematography, character analysis on Lex Luthor and Lois Lane, the Christian imagery, what I find hopeful about the movie, and yes, I'll address the critical reception. So if you're interested in any of those topics, I hope you will get something out of this series and find out why Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice has had such a profound, heartfelt, and inspiring impact on my life. Welcome to the Duck Milk Prod YouTube channel. My name is Rebecca Johnson, and this live stream is part of a series I am calling Reading Reviews with Rebecca, alliteration with ours, which will analyze the critical reception of Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice through the negative reviews written by top critics from Rotten Tomatoes, one review at a time. This is not meant to belittle anyone's opinions, but rather serve as a study of art criticism and how we discuss film. And I'm hoping that this endeavor will encourage us all to be better consumers of cinema. Today, I'll be reading through a review from the Globe and Mail titled Batman v Superman: A White-Hot Mess of a Franchise Launcher, written by Barry Hertz. The link to this review is in the video description below if you'd like to follow along and read it for yourself. Due to the age of this review, though, the Globe and Mail has put it behind a paywall. So just as a warning, should you choose to subscribe and read it, the cancellation process requires a phone call. And while the representative was perfectly nice and helpful for me, I just want to let everyone know it's a little bit of an involved process. So if you do want to go read it for yourself, which I encourage you to do so, it is behind a paywall. If Barry Hertz, the writer of this review, should ever see this review, this review of his review and this video, I just want to say that I'm aiming to do this as civilly and analytically as possible, and would ask that anyone watching live or posting in the comments would do the same. I am simply just taking a look at the criticism for and of BVS now from an historical point of view, given that these reviews were used by Warner Brothers in their decision-making process regarding the DC Extended Universe. And of course, due to the poor reviews for Batman v Superman, the tone and approach to the franchise were changed for Justice League and ultimately led to the destruction of the Snyderverse. And before I get into Barry's thoughts, though, I'm sure there are some viewers out there who might think, hey, Barry Hertz is a professional film critic. He has, an article and an outlet that's respected by some people. What do you have to say about any of this, Rebecca? Who cares what you have to think? And you know what? I think that's a fair question. And so I put together a little video to go over some of my background, just in case that helps answer that question. I graduated from the University of Alabama, Roll Tide, with a degree in telecommunications and film and a focus on broadcast television production. While I've never been to film school, in my television and production experience, I've learned about and have lots of practice in operating cameras, shot composition, and editing. Lighting, green screen, and audio are my weak spots, admittedly, but I've been working on those. After working in local TV news, running cameras, and working in production, I got a job at Turner, now Warner Media, or whatever they're calling themselves now, for 14 years. I worked with networks, or brands as they call them now, like TBS, TNT, Adult Swim, Cartoon Network, Boomerang, True TV, and Turner Classic Movies as a video encoding specialist. I also did a fair amount of closed captioning work and DVD and Blu-ray QC. In case you are wondering how I podcasted about Supergirl and the DCEU films while working for a Time Warner company, I actually got permission and clearance from my human resources representative. If you think I wouldn't criticize stories that were under the same corporate umbrella, that was never a problem nor a concern for me. If I thought the Supergirl TV series or a DCEU film had faults, I said so. In the last 17 years, I have served as a director, technical director, and camera operator at my local church in a live production capacity. I've been a video editor for 17 years, having worked in Avid, Final Cut, and Premiere Pro CC. In my day job, I shoot and edit news and documentary-style video content that involves interviews and narrative storytelling. I'm also currently an amateur photographer and am aiming to improve my efforts in still photography. You can check out my work over at Instagram at The Derby Kid. Link is in the video description below. While discussing these film reviews, music and film scores will inevitably come up. It may be good to know that in my life I have played piano, handbells, clarinet, bass clarinet, bassoon, acoustic guitar, and have even started learning how to play the ukulele. I've played in marching bands, symphonic bands, and wind ensembles, and have sung in many choirs. While I don't consider myself a world-class musician, far from it actually, I do know some things about music and am a big fan of film scores and soundtracks. In addition to my production and musical experience, I have had lots of experience in art criticism. I've been podcasting about television and film since 2009 and do so on a regular basis with Supergirl Radio, a podcast I co-host about the CW Supergirl TV series. I am also a writing contributor to the Justice League Universe podcast that offers analysis on the DCEU films. You might even hear my voice occasionally in recordings and audio commentaries over there. I'm not an expert, but I care deeply about film, television, storytelling, and art. So I hope this gives you a background on where I'm coming from. Okay, now that we have gotten that out of the way, let's get into the review that we are going to be discussing this week. This is Barry Hertz's review from the Globe and Mail. So we're going to start where I like to start usually. So we're going to start by looking at the headline or the title of this piece which is, I'm having a hard time talking today. The title of the piece is called Batman v Superman, a white-hot mess of a franchise launcher. Technically, Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice was not the franchise launcher. That would have been Man of Steel. I know what Barry means, though, I think, given the inclusion of Batman, Wonder Woman, Aquaman, Cyborg, and The Flash in the film. So I guess he's looking at franchise starting now that things have kicked into high gear in the universe. But technically, the franchise launcher is not correct. I also have a question about why is Batman v Superman a white-hot mess? Maybe we'll find out in the review as we go, but it's not really clear in that title. Also, it's also I think that I find this fascinating. It's also worth noting that Barry gave this film 1.5 stars out of 4. That's interesting. So we'll have to see if he has any explanation for the 1.5 stars. Maybe we'll discover that as we go along. All right. So Barry's opening to this piece is as follows. So he writes, quote, Zack Snyder's Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice is many things. A clash of comic book titans, a blockbuster decades in the making, a chance for Ben Affleck's mighty chin to one-up Henry Cavill's dimpled masterpiece. And he has this in parentheses. It is, not alas, a small claims case winding its way through Gotham's judicial system. But more than any of those things, BVS represents the hopes and dreams of its studio, Warner Brothers, and even the future of Hollywood itself, unquote. I actually like this first paragraph. There's a bit of hyperbole there at the end, but I actually like the first paragraph. It's opening things up in a nice way where it's sort of telling you where he kind of wants to go. And I think it's written pretty well, so I'll give it that. And there's a little humor in there. I like the mention of Affleck's chin and Cavill's dimples. So I think that's a lighthearted way to start the review. So I think that's a good way to go about it. Though I will say it's not correct here, talking about the judicial system. Barry's attempt at cracking a joke about the V in the title is misleading because there is a judicial aspect in the film in the form of the Senate hearing. So I might grant Barry here that BVS was a film that, WB hoped would lead to bigger things for the DC film franchise. But to say that Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice represents the future of Hollywood itself, oh my gosh, the hyperbole in this is so incredibly hyperbolic. Why is Hollywood depending on Batman and Superman to save it? What has happened to Hollywood that Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice is the only film that can save it? And you know what? I might make that argument. I could make that argument that BVS could have been the film to save Hollywood. But I'm curious as to why Barry thought that BVS was such an important movie to Warner Brothers and to Hollywood itself. Wow, that's a big statement. So Let's keep going in the review. He writes, quote, "The new film is ostensibly a sequel to Snyder's 2013 epic Man of Steel, in which Cavill's Clark Kent tried to live a normal life when not inadvertently inflicting a massacre upon Metropolis during a fight with his Kryptonian nemesis. But instead of being another solo Supes adventure, BVS ups the ante to include everyone's favorite orphan vigilante and a half dozen other DC Comics characters who Warner hopes will carry their own franchises someday soon. So soon, in fact, that Warner has mapped out 9 DC films until the year 2020, with one, Suicide Squad, opening this summer, and 3 options, Wonder Woman, Justice League Part 1, and Aquaman, in various stages of production," unquote. Okay, so let's get into this. So he writes, quote, "Cavill's Clark Kent tried to live a normal life when not inadvertently inflicting a massacre upon Metropolis during a fight with his Kryptonian nemesis," unquote. I suppose I should be thankful that I am getting Barry's perspective on Man of Steel here, but this is misleading to the reader. If you read this and you had not seen the film, if you had not seen Man of Steel for yourself, you wouldn't know that General Zod inflicted the massacre on Metropolis, and Superman was simply trying to stop him. Some buildings, came down, some destruction happened, but it's not as if Superman was trying to do any of this. He was a hero, like in most heroic films, especially in a lot of heroic superhero movies. Sometimes this stuff happens. I wonder if Barry would also say this about any of the other MCU movies. This is a very similar situation happened in the Avengers, Joss Whedon's first Avengers movie. So I'd be curious if Barry would also make these kinds of claims and jokes about it. And I guess speaking of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, let's keep going with Barry's review and see what he has to say. So Barry goes on to say, quote, "It's all part of a bid to compete with Disney's game-changing Marvel Cinematic Universe," which he puts in quotation marks, "which counts the likes of Iron Man, Captain America, Thor, and the Avengers films as part of its ridiculously successful brand, a brand that has changed the very nature of blockbuster filmmaking. You can see the ripple effects in everything from the endless Fast and Furious franchise to the rapidly expanding Star Wars galaxy. Films cannot exist on their own anymore. Each must instead be a marketing plank that leads to another," unquote. So I do agree with Barry here that the MCU did change the, quote, very nature of blockbuster filmmaking. And I like the examples that he gave in this piece. He's not wrong. I would agree. Films after the MCU now have to be treated more like TV episodes than standalone films. But what he doesn't mention here is that the MCU's way of handling humor also applies to how they changed things for these kinds of movies, especially from my perspective in the Star Wars example. Lots of MCU-esque quippy jokes in the Disney Star Wars sequels, even though they absolutely did not belong there. And I actually saw a fan who I saw a fan video of somebody removing those jokes from some of those Disney Star Wars movies, and it actually felt more like Star Wars when those jokes were removed. So I thought that was especially funny in those examples. So I don't disagree with Barry, but I also wonder why Marvel has to be in here at all. This is a Batman v Superman review. This is not an MCU review. So I understand the tendency and the temptation to pit the MCU up against what BVS was trying to accomplish. It's just too easy to do that. I mean, there's a lot of temptation to do that, but it really doesn't belong in a film review. If that's what you're maybe this is not supposed to be a film review. Maybe it's supposed to be just an editorial about the movie. Although it's listed among film reviews on Rotten Tomatoes and the top critics of Rotten Tomatoes as well. So I kind of think that this really doesn't belong here, but I don't disagree with Barry. I think he makes a good point here, but I just don't think it belongs in this kind of review. I'm going to stop here for a second and look at the chat and see what people are talking about, since we're all kind of reading this review together. Let's see. Dennis says General Zod massacred Metropolis. Clark was literally on the other side of the world. That's a great point. Superman was actually in the Indian Ocean trying to stop the other stuff that was happening there, the Black Zero and that ship. He was trying to break the connection there. So that is a good point. Let's see. Cole asks, since when did the critics ever have to know what they're talking about? It's a fair question. It's a fair question. If you're a critic, do you have to know what you're talking about, or do you just say whatever you feel like? That's a great question. Let's see. David talks about the Marvel picks up collateral damage 4 years and half a dozen films after Avengers. Yeah, so they address it in the MCU, but it takes a while to get there until I guess they felt like they could earn talking about more serious subject matter in those movies. But BVS addresses Man of Steel right away, like right there at the opening. So that's a really good point. Let's see. Oh, this is really timely for me because I'd recently, like this weekend, just watched Blade Runner for the first time and Blade Runner 2049 for the first time. So I've tried to catch up on some of like the big films that I should have seen but have never. And so Blade Runner was one of those. And that first Blade Runner, whew, the lighting in that, the cinematography, top tier sci-fi, and top tier filmmaking, really. I know some people had issues with the story or whatever, but man, that film is pretty. There's some elements in that in Blade Runner 2049, but it's not as pretty as that first one. Those are my quick Blade Runner thoughts. If you wanted those, maybe one time we'll maybe dig deep into the Blade Runner franchise, but those are some quick Blade Runner thoughts. But Dennis points out Blade Runner, saying the same thing happened to Blade Runner. It wasn't a Star Wars ripoff, according to critics, and so there it was bad. Yeah, I mean, I think the only connection it would have to Star Wars is it has, flying cars and Harrison Ford, I guess, and blasters, but it's a completely different. Well, I guess robots. Exist in the droids exist in the Star Wars universe, but yeah, it's a completely different thing. Let's see. I'm trying to see where we are in the chat here. Oh, interesting. So I don't know much about the history of Blade Runner, and I don't want to make this a Blade Runner live stream, but it's new for me, so I'm learning about things. David says Blade Runner was inspired by anime, and it retro inspired things like Akira. That's very interesting to know. And David also asked, which cut of Blade Runner in 1982 did you see? I did watch the final cut that is available on HBO Max, so that is the one that I saw. I know there's an alternate version that was released in the theaters where they had the Shining clips where they sort of drive off into the the happy ending or whatever. And I did see that they reworked the ending because they thought the ending with the unicorn origami was not a happy ending, and I was like, what are you talking about? That I interpreted that as a happy ending, that Deckard and Rachel would go off together. So executives are weird. People need to like watch movies as if they are an actual audience member, because you wouldn't rework that if you actually watch the film. Anyway, those are my quick Blade Runner thoughts. Let's continue on into the review. So let's see, where are we? Let's catch up with Barry. So he writes, quote, to catch up, Warner has bet half a decade worth of development and billions of dollars on the back of Snyder's vision. Well, you win some, you lose some. BVS is not only an embarrassing effort to kickstart a business plan, it is a shambolic, ill-advised, white-hot mess of a movie. During its two and a half bewildering hours, BVS piles bad decision upon bad decision, as if Snyder decided to pull a Springtime for Hitler on Warner and turn it into something so wrong-headed and offensive that it could only succeed by failing. So Barry tries to make his Springtime for Hitler reference work here, but I don't know if it's applicable. I'd be open to other people's thoughts about how he makes Springtime for Hitler in Germany work here. If you don't know, Springtime for Hitler in Germany is a musical number from The Producers, which is both a stage musical and also has a film adaptation of it. So this musical number starts off awkwardly and offensively for the audience. It's a bunch of people singing about Hitler. It's a bunch of Germans singing about how great Hitler is and how great the Nazi party is. And while that's happening, people in the audience, you see, especially in the film adaptation, everybody wants to walk out because they're so offended by this. But then when Hitler, as portrayed by the actor in the musical, enters the number, and because it's so over the top and ridiculous, people actually wander back into their seats and they start laughing about it, and they're actually entertained. It's the same musical numbers, the same situation, same setup, but somehow people are enjoying it now. Barry is asserting that Snyder intentionally wanted to offend the audience and that BVS would succeed by failing. Barry should specify here, though, I think that BVS is offensive to him, not the entire audience. I didn't think it was offensive at all. He doesn't, though, have a Springtime for Hitler in Germany audience, like in the film adaptation, to show us here. So there's no statistics or polls here to back his claim up. He can't point to how the entire audience wants to walk out. He can only speak for himself. So I wish he would have clarified that. I guess you're supposed to assume, but he's speaking like he's talking for the entire audience. I think personally that Zack Snyder and Chris Terrio genuinely told a story that they found interesting in a film that they wanted to make. I don't think they wanted to offend people. I think they just wanted to make a film that they thought was interesting. Did they know that some people in the general public would have issues with some of their choices? Yeah, I think they did. In fact, Zack Snyder talks about how he changed how Batman handles a goon in the Dark Knight Returns story. So it would actually be less violent in Batman v Superman. They knew that the characterizations would need to be justified, and that's why you see a redemption for Batman and you see Superman making heroic choices in the end. I mean, if you don't like it, you don't like it, but I don't think it's fair to ascribe a motive to the filmmaker and the screenwriter that isn't true. You don't technically know that. You're just assuming things about these people. The filmmaker, Zack Snyder, wasn't intentionally trying to offend you. He's trying to tell you a story, and he's trying to make a film that he thinks is interesting and that he would hope that you would want to watch. So I don't know why it's so offensive, but apparently it's so offensive that a Springtime for Hitler in Germany reference was inserted into this review. But I guess maybe we could keep reading this review to figure out just what was so offensive to Barry about BVS. So he writes, quote, "To be clear, the superhero genre is not an easy one to screw up. The Marvel films have proven time and again that even the blandest of filmmakers can succeed given a few key elements to play with. Humor, sharp casting, a sense that one story affects an entire universe of others, maybe a talking tree, we're not picky. These are lessons that Snyder must have recognized, taken a good look at, and then thrown in a dumpster, which he then promptly set on fire," unquote. Barry mentioned the MCU earlier. Now we're going back to the MCU. We're returning to it because it sort of sounds like Barry's a fan of the MCU. He sounds like he's a big MCU watcher. He likes talking trees and all sorts of things, and the humor, especially, of the MCU. So it seems like he is a big fan of Karud, of the MCU, and how they do movies. It seems, though, to me that his biggest argument here is that Zack Snyder didn't want to make an MCU movie, so therefore BVS is bad. But to be fair to Barry, maybe he's got some better reasons. Let's keep reading. So he writes, quote, "There are so many baffling elements to BVS that slinging out any one is to be paralyzed by choice. Where to start? Perhaps it's with Snyder's approach to his title heroes, who he doesn't seem to like all that much. Snyder's Superman is not a paragon of virtue and selflessness so much so he's not a paragon of virtue and selflessness so much as he is kind of a jerk. Kal-El sneers, sulks, and lashes out. It's a complete mishandling of the character who, at his best, inspires hope and courage, not fear and disgust," unquote. So Zack Snyder doesn't like Batman or Superman because he makes different choices with them than other people maybe would have. If that's your argument, you'd have to say that about a lot of storytellers when it comes to those characters, because every storyteller does a little bit something different with them. And I would argue that Zack Snyder actually cares more about Batman and Superman than a lot of storytellers do. Zack Snyder tries to make Superman a well-rounded character. He's not just a one-note cardboard cutout of an ideal. He has doubts and fears just like anyone would. He loves his mom and his girlfriend, but also understands his responsibility to the world because of his great powers. He sticks up for the people who are in need, which is why Clark argues with Perry White about which stories they should write in the Daily Planet. Barry also argues that Zack Snyder's Superman isn't a paragon of, a paragon really means a model, essentially, isn't a paragon or a model of virtue, but he is, though. He models goodness through his actions in every case and in every situation that he's presented with. Cavill's Superman and Clark Kent does the right thing when the opportunity arises for him to make a choice. He makes the right ones. Now, you could potentially get into the Nightmare Superman, and you could maybe make this case about him not being a paragon of virtue in that situation. But as far as the story in Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, Superman is, I would argue, a paragon of virtue. Barry says that Kal-El Sneal sulks and lashes out. When? I would like some examples of this, but we're not given any, so I don't know what he's talking about here. He also says, quote, "It's a complete mishandling of the character who, at his best, inspires hope and courage, not fear and disgust," unquote. Says who? Barry, I guess, because Batman and the citizens of Metropolis in the film would probably disagree with Barry. Batman's entire monologue at the end during the funeral sequence is about how his mind is changed about humanity after interacting with Superman and then seeing how he died, saving the world from the threat of doomsday. Batman was inspired, filled with hope and courage, even after being a character who was filled with fear and disgust for most of the film. And I might take a second here to readjust my headphones and maybe take a look in the chat. So hang out for a second with me. All right. Sometimes headphones get a little slidey and have to readjust. So my apologies on there. Let's see what people are in the chat. Are they talking about? There's some more talk about Blade Runner. I really should maybe do a video about Blade Runner sometime. It seems to be a topic of great conversation. Darkside says Snyder and Terrio's dialogue slapped in BBS. I agree. I thought the writing was excellent. The more you dig into that dialogue, the more things really speak to me, at least. I shouldn't speak for everybody else, but I should speak for me. The more I dug into it, the more layers I found. Let's see. Dennis says he compares Clark to Jesus. I think that's enough evidence that he cares. That's a good point. It's very reverent and respectful. Some people don't like the Christ figure allegory there, but I think that means that he cares an awful lot about Superman. He is very reverent and respectful to the character. Let's see. I'm going to try to keep going. Let's see. I think there's some more MCU talk. And Mask of Shy points out that being fair, they're reviewing the butchered theatrical version. Yeah, I think it's fair to remember that every time that we look at one of these. But in the same vein, the theatrical version, I mean, everything that they're complaining about is there in the theatrical version. Sometimes they just don't see it, or sometimes they're not looking for it. So let's get back into the review and keep going. So now we're getting to the point where Barry is talking about Zack Snyder's treatment of Batman. So he writes, quote, "Perhaps, though, Superman's shabby treatment was chosen so we'd more easily identify with Bruce Wayne's bizarre determination to beat the guy up, because that's never happened in any DC stories with Batman and Superman." Barry continues on to say, quote, "The film's title promises a battle royale, so there's got to be something worth tussling about. In this case, Snyder torques Superman's altruistic persona by positioning him as a careless weapon of mass destruction, with Affleck's Wayne as the world's last rational man, a pessimistic pragmatist, a pessimistic pragmatist who believes that the godlike Kent must be controlled. Plus, Superman seems awfully smug, so hey, maybe Batman should just kill the guy," unquote. Okay, I'm a little confused by this paragraph. How does Snyder torque Superman as a careless weapon of mass destruction? I'm not sure what he's talking about there. Also, how is Superman smug? When does that happen? No examples? Okay, I guess we'll never know then. After writing about the film promising a reason for the battle royale, Barry doesn't seem to understand the reason. I guess Barry doesn't seem to understand the reason that they are going to be tussling. The fact that Bruce thinks Superman is a threat to humanity and that Clark doesn't like that Batman has been going around branding criminals and sending them to their deaths in prison, which of course is partially Lex Luthor's doing, unknown to both of them. So it just seems like Barry, he's writing about the reason for the big fight at the end, but he doesn't seem to understand why they're fighting in the first place. So to continue on, Barry writes, quote, "This is the question that the film's first hour and a half sluggishly ponders, adding in all sorts of pointless distractions to the mix. This includes, but is not limited to, a subplot about African arms dealers, the threat of a dirty bomb, the political quest of a man who has lost his legs during Superman's Man of Steel shenanigans, the nonsensical machinations of Lex Luthor, played with delirious Zuckerbergian glee by Jesse Eisenberg, newspaper editor Perry White's insane budget requests, Michael Shannon's magical General Zod corpse, a Kryptonian version of Siri that lives inside a crashed spaceship, and a U.S. Senator played by Holly Hunter who may or may not have drank a bottle of Luthor's urine," unquote. Okay, I need to take a sip of water before we get into this because it's a lot. It really is. There's a lot here in this paragraph, and we need to get into it. So Barry, and this may be my favorite part of the review. I don't know. We'll figure that out maybe at the end. But Barry writes that these things that he lists are pointless distractions. Pointless in that they have no meaning. There's no point there. There is no point to these things in Batman v Superman. So he talks about a subplot of African arms dealers. Well, that's a whole sequence to the film that talks about Lex Luthor's plan to get the public and the government to distrust Superman. It's part of an entire effort to frame him for global problems that are caused. I don't know. I think that's got a point to it. I don't know that that's a pointless point in the film. He also talks about a threat of a dirty bomb that's mentioned here. And I think I don't know that Barry fully understands the dirty bomb aspect here. Bruce and Alfred think that what the white Portuguese is carrying is a dirty bomb, but they realize later that there is no dirty bomb threat. That actually the white Portuguese is carrying around a kind of weapon, the green kryptonite found by Lex Luthor's people, and that it can be used to weaken Kryptonian cells. They find out what the white Portuguese is actually carrying kryptonite. So I'm a little confused by the mention here of the dirty bomb because it sounds like maybe Barry didn't understand this part of the film. I don't know. He also lists out the political quest of a man who lost his legs during Superman's Man of Steel shenanigans. So again, these are things that Barry Hertz is saying are pointless in the film. Wallace Keefe is very important in this film. He's included in the film because Lex Luthor uses his hatred of Superman and the fact that he lost his legs as a way to get a bomb to go off in the Capitol building that would be undetected by the American government and Superman. He needs Wallace to put him in that wheelchair, to put a bomb in the wheelchair that Superman cannot see. And he does so successfully. And it makes people question Superman. So I don't know. I mean, I think that's got a lot of point to it. So another thing that Barry says is pointless is the nonsensical machinations of Lex Luthor played with delirious Zuckerbergian glee by Jesse Eisenberg. What is Barry even talking about here? The entire plot, even in the theatrical version that Barry would have watched, is about how Lex Luthor has been setting up Superman, culminating in the rooftop scene where he explains his machinations. It's not hard to understand. Lex hates God. Superman is seen as a god on Earth. And so therefore Lex takes his hatred of God out on Superman and tries to make him look bad to the rest of the world and wants to kill him. How is any of that nonsensical? It makes a lot of sense to me. I don't think it's rocket science here. He also talks about newspaper editor Perry White's insane budget requests. This sounds sort of like a joke, but he puts it in here as pointless distractions. Is this a reference to Perry telling Lois she has to sit and coach? what's insane about that? Plus, I thought Barry was an MCU fan. I assume he likes jokes. Why would he have an issue with this bit of comedy in the film? I'm a little confused about this. Or is he talking about Lois's request for a chopper to Gotham, which Perry responds with, quote, "We can barely afford a bicycle," unquote. How is that insane? Perry talks earlier in the film about how papers don't make money anymore, which is a fact of reality. Newspapers aren't what they once were. I would think that Barry Hertz would know this as a writer for this publication, for the Globe and Mail. In that situation, requesting a chopper or more expensive seats during an airplane flight would be an issue. They would be doing a lot of penny pinching at the Daily Planet. So I don't think it's unreasonable for him to talk about those things. It's actually very realistic. The thing I love about the chopper example, though, especially, is that Lois tells Perry that her request is not for a story. And Perry realizes in that moment that it's not a frivolous request, and it's something much more serious during a time when some pretty crazy things are happening in the Metropolis Gotham area. And he trusts her and gets her what she needs. And I think that's a great display of their close relationship. And I think they really nailed the Perry White, Lois Lane dynamic in both Man of Steel and BVS. And so I kind of wish he would talk more about that than just trying to crack a joke about budget requests. Let's see. Barry also lists this as a pointless distraction, that Michael Shannon's magical General Zod corpse was a thing. That's a really important part of BVS. General Zod's corpse is used to create Doomsday. But, let's not leave out that important part. That's not important at all. That is just pointless. He also talks about a Kryptonian version of Siri that lives inside a crashed spaceship, which is weird because he doesn't also mention that this is part of Kryptonian technology that gets established in Man of Steel. So this is just a continuation of that. So confuses why that's in there. And then he says, he mentions a U.S. senator played by Holly Hunter who may or may not have drank a bottle of Luthor's urine. Maybe it's just me. And this could just totally be me, but I never once thought that Holly Hunter actually drank Granny's peach tea. I always assumed she hadn't noticed it until she sat down and she started speaking and it happened to catch her eye. She doesn't even get the chance to drink it, even if she was going to, because everything explodes. So I'm very confused by that statement, because when I read that, I was like, do people actually think she drank it? I never thought that she drank it. So I don't know. I guess that's up to your interpretation, but I always just assumed she just spotted it on that desk where she was sitting, and that's what kind of rattled her a little bit. Let's see. I'm trying to go through some of the chat. Dennis writes, Bruce is clearly a fallen hero. Alfred literally said it out loud, saying the only way that the movie could, the only way that the movie could be more clear if Bruce walked around with a shirt saying fallen hero on it. Yeah, I think they make it pretty clear. They do point it out. So that is a good point. Dennis also says it's implied that Perry knows that Superman is actually Clark Kent, or he just doesn't care. Or maybe he just gets a kick out of poking fun at the world's most powerful man. That's my interpretation. That's what I would choose to go with. I like the idea that he would be messing with Clark, knowing that he's Superman in situations like this.
There's copy all right.
Isn't that so much funnier if he actually knows that Clark is Superman? I think so. That's my interpretation that I choose to go with. So that's what I think. Okay, so Barry continues on. He writes, quote, somewhere in between all this madness, and make no mistake, very little here makes any sense, even in the context of a movie about aliens and caped men battling over green space rocks. Snyder completely diminishes every female character who wanders along. While the why so serious men bulk up, brood, and bleed, the women are either used as props, Luthor's provocatively dressed wordless assistant, bargaining chips, Amy Adams is Lois Lane, and Diane Lane's Martha Kent are both damsels in the worst kind of repeated distress, or Easter eggs. Gal Gadot's Wonder Woman makes a hell of an interest, but is a little more than a tease for her upcoming standalone movie, unquote. Okay, what? Okay. So he writes, Snyder completely diminishes every female character. And then he talks about Luther's provocatively dressed, wordless assistant, unquote. So he's obviously talking about Mercy Graves here. And while Mercy Graves might not speak a lot, she does have a conversation with Bruce Wayne where he compliments her shoes and tries to pretend that he's drunk. But it's not as if she doesn't get anything to do. She's with Lex as he gets his kryptonite and experiments on Zod's body. She's there when he meets with Wallace, which is a very important scene in the film. And when Lex believes that he no longer needs her and she might become a liability for him, he leaves her in the Senate hearing to die in the Capitol bombing with everyone else there. That is a pretty substantial amount of actions for an assistant character, for a character who has very few lines. And in almost every adaptation I know of for Mercy Graves, like the animated film Superman Doomsday, or even on the CW Supergirl, Mercy Graves, she tends to die in stories. She either dies or is killed by Lex Luthor. In Superman Doomsday, Lex Luthor shoots her, and in the CW Supergirl, Lex doesn't kill her, but she still dies. I'm still bitter about it, but that's okay. So this actually, for Lex to leave her for dead in the Capitol bombing is actually really character correct for both Lex and for Mercy. And I've linked actually both of those examples that I just mentioned in the video description in case you'd like to go take a look at them and see them for yourself. But the most curious part of this Mercy Graves mention here is that he mentions that she's provocatively dressed. Does anyone else think that's the case? Because when I read that, I was like, what? So let's go through some of Mercy Graves' wardrobe in the film. It just we'll just see. Like, let me know, and if you're in the live chat or in the comment section, do you think any of these examples warrant the description provocatively dressed? I'd just be curious because I have my thoughts, but I'd be curious what other people think. So here's the first one. This is the first time we see Mercy Graves. She's got like a kind of a leather jacket kind of a thing, a t-shirt. She's got some glasses. She's got some black pants and some high heel shoes. I don't personally find anything provocative about that. That seems like a pretty normal thing for her to wear. She looks nice. I mean, nothing scandalous. Okay, so let's take a look at her dress at the big party where Bruce and Clark meet for the first time. It's a black dress. You know, it's kind of sleeveless. She's got some, I guess, some black tights or hose, whatever you want to call it, and some black shoes. She looks perfectly presentable for a party. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. That's nothing provocative, really. I've seen way worse and provocative dresses. So I don't think that's very provocative. So let's go when she goes with Lex to meet up with Wallace Keefe. Let's see what she's wearing. Okay, so like a white jacket. She's got a purse. It's kind of a big purse. Some blue jeans, blue high heels. I mean, that seems perfectly normal. Okay, so let's go. Maybe it's the moment when she goes with Lex to get the kryptonite. Let's see if that's provocative. Oh no, it's just a long coat with some gloves and some pants. So I guess it can't be that. I mean, that seems pretty reasonable for the situation. I mean, even Lex has a long coat on with some pants, so it must have been cold in there. So I guess it can't be that. Which outfit that she wore was provocative? I'm trying to figure it out. Maybe it's the last one. Maybe it's the last. Maybe it really stuck out to Barry that she was provocatively dressed because maybe he's talking about the last thing she wears in the movie. So maybe it's this. Oh no, it's a completely long sleeve black dress with it buttoned all the way to the top on her neckline. I don't think that's provocative. I mean, she's literally showing nothing. So I'm very confused as to how Mercy Graves is provocative in this film, provocatively dressed. I really wish Barry had really maybe put a screenshot or something in the review. Maybe that would have helped visualize this for me, so I could really figure that out. I mean, I tried to go through there. I don't see any provocatively dressed outfits, but let me know what you think in the chat or the comments and let me know. what you think. But to continue on, he does talk about Lois Lane and Martha Kent here. He calls them bargaining chips, and that they are both damsels in the worst kind of repeated distress. So I'll give Barry the fact that Amy Adams gets held hostage. She gets held as a hostage in Africa before Superman shows up. She definitely goes toe to toe with that general, though. But let's not talk about that. She's also kidnapped by KG Beast and Lex Luthor's goons. She's thrown off of a roof by Lex Luthor, and she gets stuck underwater when she's trying to retrieve the Kryptonian spear, the Kryptonite spear. All of these examples are things she needs saving from, which is kind of typical for Lois Lane. I mean, she don't have any superpowers. She's not Wonder Woman. She can't save herself. She's got to get some help sometimes. But what Barry leaves out is that she also stands toe to toe with Lex Luthor. She calls him psychotic to his face. She uses her smarts and detective skills with the bullet that she finds in her notebook to figure out what Lex has been up to. She steps in front of a vengeful Batman ready and to deliver the kill shot on Superman. She put herself in severe danger doing that. She pulls Superman out of kryptonite-infested water. And then her evidence by the end of the movie, I mean, this is something you kind of have to come to a conclusion to, but Lex goes to prison. Well, how does he go to prison? Well, it's because Lois has all the evidence. She tells him straight to his face, like, I've proven what you've done. So the evidence is used to send Lex Luthor to prison. So I don't know. In terms of Lois, I think Barry is leaving a few things out about how Lois is portrayed in Batman v Superman, because when you just call her a damsel in distress, you're leaving out a whole bunch of other things. So when he talks about Martha, it's a fair point. I mean, Martha is kidnapped by Lex Luthor's goons too, and she's threatened with death by fire. But she also is the one who gives Superman, the strongest being in the world, comes to get advice from Martha Kent on the farm. And she also helps Batman return to his heroic ways through the Martha rescue. So I think that should be mentioned as well. Something that Barry does not mention. He also talks about how Gal Gadot's Wonder Woman makes a hell of an entrance, but is little more than a tease for her upcoming standalone movie. So he couldn't even let that stand as a compliment that Wonder Woman gets a hell of an entrance. And everybody will tell you, even people who don't like Batman v Superman, I bet they're going to tell you, hey, but that Wonder Woman entrance, that was pretty good stuff. I like that he couldn't even let that stand as a compliment. He had to put a but in there to back up his argument that the female characters were treated like crap in this film, just to make it seem like what he's trying to argue makes some sense and has backing to it. Not every female character has to fight Doomsday like Wonder Woman to be seen as valuable or to play their part in this story or this film. All of the ladies in BVS have their roles to play, and they're meaningful and important. And so it seems to me like the only one diminishing the female characters in BVS here is Barry Hertz from the Globe and Mail. Those are just my thoughts. So to continue on here, Barry says, just as with Watchmen, Sucker Punch, and 300, Snyder occasionally, and my Google Doc here shows that occasionally might be misspelled. I think Barry may have put two S's in there. I think there's only supposed to be one S. So just pointing that out, he may have needed a better editor or an editor at all. I don't know what the situation behind the scenes was. But he writes, just as with Watchmen, Sucker Punch, and 300, Snyder occasionally reminds the audience and perhaps Time Warner shareholders that he can be an inspired visual madman with a few shots so fantastically designed and staged that they could be freeze-framed and drooled over for hours. A cornfield set funeral is washed out and hyper-realized that it goes past absurdity to become something close to high art. A visit to LexCorp headquarters is a trip to the extremes of millennial office design fetishism. That is a fun word to say just because it's a weird word to say. Fetishism. Yeah, I guess that's the best way to say that. And a Bruce Wayne nightmare is a captivating blend of gritty dystopia wasteland and ultra crisp color palette. Some of that I feel like maybe could have gone through a little bit of an edit. But we're going to continue on and just kind of go with what Barry writes here. I really appreciate that Barry recognizes Zack Snyder's strong visual style, going as far to write that these shots are so fantastically designed and staged that they could be freeze framed and drooled over for hours, and that they are high art. Barry, I agree 100% about this. I am so shocked that someone writing one of these reviews would actually acknowledge that. But I'm 100% in agreement, Barry. 100%. You could basically pick any frame out of the film and you could frame it and put it up on a wall. So I agree with that. And then Barry goes on to say, a quote, "Yet that funeral scene is devoid of emotion. Luthor's whole reason for existing in the film is dubious, and Batman's dream sequence is so poorly conceived. Why is Batman wearing a trench coat atop his suit? What's with the flying insects? Why was a dream envisioned from perspectives other than the person dreaming? What, was that who I think it was during that message from the future bit? If so, why? Why? Question mark, question mark, question mark. To be laughable. The film might be pretty to look at, but narratively speaking, it is a disaster." Unquote. Okay, lots of things in that paragraph. So he says the funeral scene was devoid of emotion. Why? Or how? How is it devoid of emotion? He doesn't really go into why that is the case. What about that scene between Martha and Lois while Lois is in Clark's room and Martha gives her the ring? I thought that had a lot of emotion in it. Clark was going to propose to Lois, and Martha had the ring and gave it to her. And Lois takes kind of a moment after she gets the ring, and it's actually really special that she still has that thing from Clark. Clark, even after he's dead, he still gives her something. She still is presented with something that he wanted to give her. I think there's a ton of emotion in those scenes. What about Martha putting the picture of Clark and Jonathan from Man of Steel in Clark's coffin? That has a ton of emotion backing it, with the fact that here Martha Kent is having lost two of the most important men in her life, and she's having to bury her son. So maybe it's just me. I can only speak for myself, but I think those scenes have a ton of emotion in them. So I'm very confused as to why Barry thinks that they're lacking in emotion. He writes, Luthor's whole reason for existing in the film is dubious. How? Barry doesn't really go into that. He also says Batman's dream sequence is so poorly conceived. Why is Batman wearing a trench coat? And he asks all these questions about the nightmare sequence. Okay, so I'm going to kind of dig into this for a second. Barry wrote a lot about the MCU before, and how that franchise does a lot of work in promoting the next movie while showing you the current movie. But for some reason, he's having trouble understanding that BBS would be teasing something that would come in a future film within the DCEU. So that's a little strange to me. But I will try to answer his questions, though. He asks, why is Batman wearing a trench coat over his batsuit? Well, the trench coat could help him in the dusty landscape he's in the nightmare sequence, because he would still need the protectiveness of the batsuit while fighting the bad guys. He can't just change into regular clothes and then put the trench coat on. He still needs to be able to be protected by the batsuit. So, also just because it looks cool. I think that's kind of another reason. It looks so cool that comic book creators put Nightmare Batman in the comics because he looks cool. But I think there's an actual functional, couple of functional reasons for him to wear it. Barry also asks, what's with the flying insects? Well, of course, they are parademons, and Barry would have gotten the answer to this not too soon after this, because the parademons were in the Justice League version that was released in 2017. And if things had gone well and we would have gotten to see what Zack Snyder intended for Justice League, they would have been explored even more in that version. So you would have gotten the answers. Barry would have gotten the answers to the parademons, those flying insects, if all things had gone to plan, and if he had just waited. And I guess if he's an MCU fan, he would have been used to waiting. So I don't know why that's such a problem. He also asks, why was a dream envisioned from perspectives other than the person dreaming? I'm a little confused here as to what he's referring to. The nightmare vision is from Batman, or Bruce Wayne, who's doing the dreaming. That's why it's called the nightmare vision, or the nightmare sequence. So I'm a little confused about what other perspectives aside from Bruce he's talking about. I don't know if he's talking about the Flash? I don't know what he's talking about there. So I can't exactly answer his question because I don't know what he means. And then he asks, was that who I think it was during that message from the future bit? If so, why? Why? Question mark, question mark, question mark. I assume that here he's referring to the Flash and that and that this appearance and tease are only a problem because it doesn't occur during a post-credit tease. Maybe if the nightmare sequence was when the post-credit tease, maybe it would have landed better for other people. I don't know, but I mean, it has a point to why it's in the place it is in the film. Because you need to sort of tease it out and make it seem like the fear him is talking about Superman and not Darkseid. And so there's a whole setup there. It's like driving him, it's pushing him towards the big fight with Superman. So there's a reason why it exists in the place that it does within the film. And it's also a greater sequence of dreams and visions that Bruce Wayne is having in the film. So it's not like it comes out of nowhere. So I guess I'm a little confused. Is it not okay to figure out what the nightmare sequence is doing because of where it's placed in the film? Is it the fact that DC is doing it? I mean, if the MCU did it, it would be perfectly fine, right? So I guess I'm a little confused as to why it's such a problem here. I think I might hop back into the chat to see what other people are talking about just to catch up before we wrap up this review. Let's see if there's, let's see. Dennis wonders if this reviewer has ever heard of Darkseid or Injustice. It doesn't seem like it. Maybe if it appeared in the MCU, maybe he would know. But it doesn't seem like there's any effort to research that material, or at least kind of familiarize yourself with what's going on. I typically would do that if I was reviewing something. I would want to know what I'm talking about when I'm writing it, even if I don't have a familiarity with it. Or be able to talk about it to a big degree. I'd want to at least know what they are. So yeah, I think that's a good question to ask. Mask of Shy says, I really hate when critics praise the pretty visuals only to separate them from the narrative and later then ask why this wasn't explained. Maybe because those pretty visuals are the narrative. That is a really, really good point, Mask of Shy. I think people sometimes downplay the visual storytelling that's happening, especially in Snyder's film. I mean, we talked about Blade Runner. There's a lot of visual storytelling happening in that film. But I think we've sort of, as a filmmaking audience, we may have lost the ability to do some of that film comprehension that's required to be able to get through some of those visuals and still come away with having interpreted what those visuals mean. So yeah, when they make those sort of style over substance arguments, I'm like, yeah, but it is the substance. So that's a really, really good point. All right, so let's get into the wrapping up of this review. So Barry goes on to say, Warner wants, no, needs you to latch onto BVS's versions of Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, and the rest of the Justice League if the studio is going to succeed in the marketplace. By the film's end, you should, no, must be giddy with anticipation of what big bad threat is lurking around the corner for these super friends. But there's no purpose for this aggressive world. Instead of letting Snyder's justice dawn, his vision should simply shuffle off into the twilight, unquote. I mean, the last sentence there, I mean, is really well written. He's actually playing with the metaphors in a good way there. And I actually agree with the first sentence in this final paragraph here. WB needed BVS to work if the studio was going to compete with the likes of the MCU that Barry continually talks about. The problem is they only gauge success based on the Rotten Tomatoes percentage and reviews like this one, instead of looking at what I think was a pretty healthy box office return and the fan excitement and the fan engagement that was going on at this time, which was through the roof at this point in time. Even if you hated BVS, this was my experience that I would see on the internet or in real life. Even if people hated BVS when it came out, those people still went to go see it and they were still talking about it afterwards. Even if it was to make 4-hour videos on YouTube about how much they hated it, they were still talking about it. And that is something that I think any filmmaker or any studio should be pleased with, because then people are still talking about what you put out there. So Barry also says, quote, by the film's end, you must be giddy with anticipation of what big bad threat is lurking around the corner for these super friends, unquote. Well, I was. So I guess there was a success on that part. If you're measuring success by that sentence, I was definitely giddy with anticipation for what was coming next, and that's why I was so disappointed. Why I was so disappointed when Justice League came out, because it didn't really seem like the same conclusion. So then Barry also says there's no purpose for this aggressive world. I wonder what Barry means in this thought, because I actually don't know. Why does he find the world of BVS aggressive? And how does he find no purpose in it? These are genuine questions that I have that I don't get answered, unfortunately, by the review. But I definitely would be curious if anybody has any thought about what he means by no purpose for this aggressive world. And then he writes in his last sentence, instead of letting Snyder's justice dawn, his vision should simply shuffle off into the twilight. Well, Barry, you got what you wanted, and I hope you're happy about that. All right, well, that's going to do it for this week's review and analysis from the top critics of Rotten Tomatoes, specifically from this instance of Barry Hertz of the Globe and Mail. If you missed this live, I hope you'll consider sharing your thoughts in the comment section below. And if you ever have any questions about when I'm going to go live, because I might have to miss a couple of weeks here this summer because I'll be out of town or at conventions. So if you have any questions about when I'm actually going to be live and when I'm going to be doing these live streams, just check this YouTube channel, youtube.com/duckmilkprod. I'll be scheduling streams in advance when I am available, so you'll always be able to know when I'm going to go live. And you can hit that get a reminder button, and that'll help you get notified when I do go live. And since we had that really good suggestion from David about sharing positive reviews, sharing reviews that you thought did a good job. So if you have a BVS review that you'd like to share that you think knocked it out of the park, comment below the video, and I'll share it in video descriptions of future videos for other people to read, because I think that's a good exercise. It's a good thing to look at film reviews that maybe weren't as good. But I think it's also worth looking at reviews that do something well, that actually do a good job of analysis and looking into the film as it is meant to be looked into. So I definitely think that should be shared and celebrated as well. So if you have any of those reviews, please let me know. Well, I think that's going to do it for this week and our analysis of this BVS review. So I'm going to let voiceover Rebecca take it from here and wrap up this live stream. If you would like to see more of these live streams, make sure to subscribe to this YouTube channel at youtube.com/duckmilkprod. If you'd like to keep in touch with me personally, you can follow me on Instagram at TheDerbyKid and on Vero at DerbyKid. You can hear my thoughts on the CW Supergirl TV series and all things Kara Zor-El over at Supergirl Radio by visiting supergirlradio.com, subscribing wherever you listen to podcasts, or subscribing to the DC TV Podcast YouTube channel, which you can find at youtube.com/DCTV Podcasts. Also, please check out the Justice League Universe podcast for in-depth analysis on the DCEU films, including Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. And before I go, I hope that this live stream video series will inspire you to think more critically and thoughtfully about film and storytelling. I'd like to leave you with this quote from C.S. Lewis's book titled An Experiment in Criticism. The truth is not that we need the critics in order to enjoy the authors, but that we need the authors to enjoy the critics. My name is Rebecca Johnson, and I love Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. And I am publishing a series of videos exploring the reasons why I am such a fan of Zack Snyder's film. In this series, you'll find my thoughts on topics that matter to me, like Larry Fong's cinematography, character analysis on Lex Luthor and Lois Lane, the Christian imagery, what I find hopeful about the movie, and yes, I'll address the critical reception. So if you're interested in any of those topics, I hope you will get something out of this series and find out why Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice has had such a profound, heartfelt, and inspiring impact on my life.